Yo, welcome to What If Deku Had an Artist Quirk Part 3. It's your boy, Golden What Ifs, Golden Falls, Golden What Ifs, whatever you want to call me. And I'm back with Part 3 of this What If. The last What If I didn't realize that I titled it improperly because I just like copy and paste and then replace numbers. I'm glad. Thanks for all you that like spammed it in the comment section because it actually allowed me to see the comment. I get busy throughout the day, so when I saw the comment, I was like, oh shoot, so I just went on my phone and changed it really quick. So I appreciate that. That doesn't help viewership, I'm not gonna lie, because when I get the titles wrong, it doesn't really help with the algorithm, but still, it's alright. It happens sometimes. I've done it a couple times throughout my time on YouTube, but still, I hope y'all been enjoying the series. I hope y'all enjoyed Saiyan Deku. I hope you've been enjoying Artist Quirk Deku. And I'm not going to waste that much more of your time. And let's just get into the what if. And last where we left off was approaching the USJ. So let's get it. Izuku Midoriya and his class head off to the one and only USJ, ran by Pro Hero 13, a support or at least a rescue hero that we know of. Izuku and his class would arrive there after chatting on a bus, and when they would speak to everybody and speak to Pro Hero 13, she would begin to explain what's going on. Izuku would continue to write down in his journal little notes here and there. It's just kind of how he is, and he's still like that. Izuku would listen to Pro Hero 13, and she would explain the different rescue scenarios that they'll be going through. Some are based around water, cliff sides, some burned down buildings, even emergencies and hospitals depending on injuries. And she would begin to explain more and more, but Izuku begins to see this odd looking mist coming from the middle of the USJ, seemingly right over this beautiful fountain. Just as this mist appears, a giant portal would open up and a ton of villains would pour out. Now this was not good. Now this was terrible, and Aizawa knew it. Jumping into action almost instantaneously, Izuku begins to look in his journal for anything that can help. Immediately just finding any gear or supplies that would allow them to hopefully get out and allow them to leave. But when they try to leave, they're blocked. Their path is blocked by the one and only Kurogiri, the warp gate portal villain, and they're stopped entirely. Most of them are sucked away into portals and sent off to different areas, and Izuku is as well, as he goes plummeting down into this odd looking lake. He looks around to see that his notebook is drenched in water, and just as he goes to grab it, another villain grabs it with his teeth, shredding it to pieces. Izuku is shocked and tries to swim away, but of course he's not able to really get away that quickly. He's trying to kick the villains away as, well, Asui grabs it. Luckily, one of his classmates, an aquatic type of Quirk classmate, was able to snatch him up and get him to safety on a boat. At least in the meantime, they're safe. Izuku immediately tries to ask if they have any pencils, pens, anything. He needs to be able to draw something. He might be able to get out of this. And they realize that, well, they don't have anything on him at all. Izuku knows that this scenario isn't very good, and he begins to ask different people questions, asking if they have some sort of liquid, maybe an ink type of liquid, something that will stain the ground that is beneath them. Most of them don't have anything like that. So Izuku says if they don't like the sight of blood, they might want to look away now. Asui says that's probably not the best idea, saying that he shouldn't cut himself, but he says in technicality he's not going to. He grabs his thumb and breaks the nail off, making him obviously bleed, and using obviously his finger, he takes the blood and begins to draw something out. They're confused at what he's drawing, and he says that he can't go in detail, especially without certain things he has, but luckily, in connection with his imagination, he should be able to make something semi-complex. It won't be insanely complex in terms of, what he's drawing, because he's not able to use extra design and artwork, but he's able to make something. He then pulls it out of basically thin air, and Mineta and Asui are completely shocked, thinking that that was kind of insane, but what did he even make? He explains that he made some sort of generator, a generator that won't last very long, but it will last long enough. They're confused, why would that? But then they realize, they're right above water. As long as he drops the generator in, It will most likely shock everybody that's in the water, but then they kinda can't touch the water afterwards. Izuku explains that the generator will stop, but electricity has a fun way of working through water, so they gotta just hope for the best, that it tones down enough that they don't get, well, obliterated if they touch the water. But he'll probably give them about 15 seconds before, well, it kind of shuts off, and hopefully the water does a little bit less conductivity by that time they're flying over it or jumping over it. He says that they're relying on Asui to really get them over the over the gap, and she says that she'll do her best. So their plan gets flooded into motion, Izuku chucking the generator as it begins to shock everybody in the water. Asui jumps off with both of them in hand. She explains that there's no way she's going to make it, as Izuku begins to draw something on his own hand. It's just a flat square. He's able to make this wood flooring appear. It's not very thick by any means. He was barely even able to make it 2 inches thick, but at least it's something for Asui to bounce off of. As a frog can bounce off of most things in general, especially easily. So she's able to bounce off the material without getting shocked practically at all, and they're able to make it to land. It was a bit of a struggle, but it was something they were able to figure out and get away from. Izuku asks if Asui's okay and if everyone's alright, and they say they just are. They look over to see Aizawa fighting the other villains, and Izuku suggests that they need to get over to the other people as soon as possible. He looks around and eventually spots Momo, saying that this is important, they need to get to her. They ask why, and he says that she's seen his notebook and has seen what's in it. She might be able to make at least some of the, or might be able to make some of the stuff within a notebook, allowing Izuku to actually help out. Of course, they explain that maybe he can do stuff with pure imagination, but Izuku says that he's never even gotten that far. Imagery within one's mind is something far complex that he would need such concentration that he can't even get close to doing right now. Of course, Asui and Mineta understand that, it makes sense, as they jump off toward Momo. He explains to Momo quickly that she needs to make his notebook, hopefully with some of the sketches. He says it's okay if they're not in detail or if she misses some of them, but Aizawa will need some help. She tries to make it and create something and even gives him a couple pens and pencils to draw. As he looks through, he sees that the mass majority are there. He sighs in relief as he begins to basically draw out some 3D tigers, or literally bring out tigers to the surface, charging them forward at the villains. Of course, he commands them not to kill, so they're just at a point trying to knock out the villains or overpower them, helping Aizawa. Aizawa looks back and nods toward Izuku, as Izuku is supporting him from the distance. But that support won't last forever. After defeating all of the smaller or lower tier villains, the higher tier villains are ready to go. Another portal would open up, and a giant monster would come walking out. Izuku sees this monster and is completely shocked. As the tigers go charge at the monster, they are able to slightly push it over, but they get thrown away as if they were just little, kittens, just ragdolled. They would dissolve into nothing as Izuku allowed them to leave, and he begins to draw at insane rates. Izuku says that someone needs to help Aizawa now, that he's going to get killed with that thing on his tail. He was only able to buy him so much time. Izuku sends more 2D monsters toward them, more of like a paper-like monsters, very similar to the ones, breaking the fourth wall here, of the ones in Naruto. Very similar to those paper-like beings. They're not very colorful, not very in detail, but they are somewhat slowing down the Nomu to help out Aizawa. Shigaraki kind of gets frustrated at this, but before he can make a call out and do anything, an ice wall would appear right in front of Shigaraki, sectioning them off away from the Nomu. Izuku continues to draw as Todoroki screams toward him that if he's going to do anything or do something, he better do it now. Izuku smirks and says that he never finished the drawing initially, but luckily he already had a sketch. He begins to drag his pen across the paper and immediately throw it toward Aizawa. The paper seemingly flying toward Aizawa as a being. No, a person. Wait, no, it's All Might? They're all confused. How is he able to do that? That's insane. Izuku says that's only going to be a one go. He used all the details within the paper to throw it, so he's not going to have that drawing anymore, but they'll only have All Might for maybe a couple minutes. Hopefully the real one would eventually show up sooner rather than later. Aizawa, beginning to think that this is the real All Might, Izuku says that that's just a disposable one that it doesn't matter if he dies, trust me. Izuku gives him a nod as Aizawa fights with All Might, but luckily the Nomu is occupied with All Might, giving Aizawa the chance to fight off the other villains. With this opportunity and Aizawa not being injured in this fight, Aizawa is able to occupy Shigaraki relatively easily and use his quirk to counter him entirely. Izuku, Bakugo, and even Todoroki are able to help out here and there just by supporting Aizawa, and just as the real All Might would arrive, the side of the heroes will be on immense advantage. Aizawa would back up as the two All Mights would smash their fists into the Nomu, making him fly out of the USJ, as the other All Might would dissolve into nothing. All Might would smirk and shake his head, thinking that Izuku really has come a long way even in this short amount of time. It seems like Izuku has really stepped up his game even under immense pressure. Maybe immense pressure is what he needed to really up his game as well. Nonetheless, All Might stands firm and stands tall, and even was able to finish off the rest of these, or basically finish off Shigaraki and them, but unfortunately they would escape at the last second. This time around, All Might was nowhere near as severely injured, luckily enough, so he'll be able to control his big All Might form, or his actual All Might form, for a little bit longer than normal, especially compared to canon. Everybody tells, or Aizawa and them tell everybody, that they don't speak about this outside of their classroom, and that luckily nobody was a casualty and everybody seems to be in good shape and handling it well. Izuku is kind of tired. He kind of collapses to the ground a little bit as he staggers back to his feet. Bakugo helps him up by his shirt but doesn't actually hold his arm or help him around, he just lifts him up. Kind of like a Bakugo sign of respect, as of a good job to him for what he's accomplished. Bakugo continues to walk away as the buses pick up the kids, and everybody else, or all of the heroes that would stumble in later, would clean up the rest of the villains that were knocked out or unconscious. After the USJ incident, everything would go relatively smoothly. Everybody would get a bit of time off, and the announcement of the UA Sports Festival would be upon them. Everybody would learn about what is ahead. Aizawa would explain the internships and what they are potentially fighting for. And Izuku sees this as a great opportunity to get a chance at somewhere he can possibly learn from. He's restricted in a lot of the things he does, and he personally knows that. But the UA Sports Festival will allow him to try and learn new things that he could possibly come up with, and that's exactly what he's going to do. When they arrive at the UA Sports Festival, everyone begins to speak about what's going to happen and what's going on, and Izuku would learn that the person that got number 1 among all of them is actually going to do a speech, forcing him into the limelight. Of course, Izuku's not very good with speeches, but he tries his best, saying that he just wants everyone to try their hardest, and that's about it. Izuku would get ready for the first, thing, and that's the obstacle course race. Midnight announces this and then gives everybody a countdown. Everybody would race off after the countdown was finished, and Izuku tries to find a way to really keep up. He tries to basically go around obstacle after obstacle, but things get pretty tough, and honestly, nothing is exactly easy for Izuku during this. In some of the events or some of the obstacles that occur, he is able to use some gadgets that allow him to get around relatively easily though. Very similar to the way Mei Hatsume gets around and shows off her quote-unquote babies, he's able to use gadgets in the same way. Everybody is shocked to see that they must have 2 support heroes, but that's actually not the case, and Aizawa makes it clear that Izuku is in class 1A, which is a hero class, not a support hero class. Of course, Izuku would just use gliders and so on and so forth to get around, and eventually would come across the minefield. He would just use platforms to get across the minefield relatively easily and dissolve them as he walks. This is a little bit more difficult, especially with him having to shell out these images as quick as possible, but luckily he's able to get across relatively easily. This would still lead him to, well, kind of losing. He doesn't get first place as like normal, especially when he's so limited in terms of what he can do with his quirk. He's still on the idea of relying on his quirk, so you might want to make the argument, or you might try to make the argument that, well, he did it without his quirk in canon, but this time he is relying solely on his quirk. He's not going crazy in terms of, well, certain items that he could use. He could summon something crazy and fly over everything, but that would also drain his stamina immensely, and he knows that there's no reason to overdo it, especially in the first event. So he would get about 4th or 5th place, putting him in a position to definitely win. So when he hears that the 10 million point band will be on the first place winner, who is Shoto Todoroki, he seems okay with this. He doesn't really mind it, especially because he thinks he can snag some headbands and then just play on the defensive. And that's exactly what him and his team will do. His team would consist of him, Momo Yaoyorozu, Ochaku Uraka, Tokiyami, and Mei Hatsume. They would all just team up and more or less play on more of the defensive side of things in terms of the bands. He would easily grab a couple of these bands by just using some of his art. He would use some of his art or his art within his journal to grab some bands, and it would be easy peasy, using some of the animals that he can create, and then eventually creating a smaller like flying animal that attaches to his back and allows them all to float upwards. And this, on top of that, they would be supported by Ochaku's gravity quirk, and then on top of that, Mei Hatsume's rocket boots. So they're able to maintain flight relatively easily without straining the image or the picture that he brought to life. Because if they put all the weight on top of that, or all the weight on that animal or that creature, it wouldn't have been able to hold up, and it would have dissolved, and they would have gone plummeting to the ground, and it would have hurt a good little bit. But luckily they were able to maintain relatively easily, maintaining what they have and what they got, eventually leading them to the next round. Izuku has played safe from here on. He knew that there was a good chance that they would eventually go one-on-one, expecting himself to have to go heads up with Bakugo eventually in this well, kind of test. The UA Sports Festival is kind of one big test. That's how Izuku basically sees it. He wants to go head-to-head against Bakugo, even though he knows there is a bit of disadvantage in front of him. He would then patiently wait for the 1-versus-1 battles to be announced. He would stare at the screen, waiting. His stomach would be curling up in a ball, just waiting to see if he would be going up against Bakugo. But he wouldn't be. He'd be going against someone by the name of Otoshi Shinso. And he would be told by one of his classmates that to watch out. It seems as if once he replied to a question that Shinso asked, everything became like a fog. Everything became strange, as if he lost complete control over himself. Izuku sees this as a sign to get Shinso out of there ASAP. So he begins to bring his journal up with his pen as he spins it in between two fingers. Shinso questions what he's really going to do with that. He's heard about him, but he doesn't believe how much he can actually do. How much was he really doing in the other exams? I mean, it didn't seem too insane. Yeah, he was able to summon some small animals to snag some bands, but what else can he really do? The fight would then eventually begin, and Izuku would summon a pistol. And immediately Shinso thinks that he's going to get shot in the face or something, and he slightly flinches from this. But of course, this is no ordinary pistol. It just looks like one. It looks very similar to the one to Snipe's pistol. And obviously Shinso would flinch at this, but as he shoots, it just shoots out a giant net. The net pushes Shinso off of the stage, and he sticks him to the wall. And it's announced that Izuku is the winner. Of course, Shinso is enraged by this, thinking that Izuku didn't even say a word. He didn't even get him to give a chance for him to show off or show anything he could do. Izuku is stoic. This Izuku is very intelligent, just like the one in canon, but this one is definitely not going to give Shinso a chance to anger him or even sway him in any direction. Izuku knows who he is. He knows what he is. And frankly, he wasn't bullied nowhere near as much as before in canon, so there is no reaction he has here. There's no reaction that Shinso would even force him into, Izuku immediately eliminating him and forcing to the next round. Izuku is passionate about going against Bakugo here. He wants to make sure that he can go head to head with his so-called rival, and he wants to make sure that he can beat him. But he's going to have to get through far more than just Shinso, because as the time would go by and as the matches would go by, the match between him and Todoroki would show up. Izuku knows how strong Todoroki is. He knows what's in front of him. Izuku, unfortunately, might have to show his trump card before he actually wanted to. As Izuku enters the stage and the countdown is said and done, a giant iceberg would go getting flung at Izuku. Todoroki would immediately think it's over. It was handled in a matter of seconds. He did it all over again, just like what he did to Sero. But out of nowhere, everything begins to shake, tremor, and out of nowhere, everything shatters. The ground shatters, and so does the iceberg, and Izuku is standing there. But this time around, he's in some sort of suit of armor. Nothing bulky, nothing too crazy, but it's a suit of armor that he had stowed away or just put away within his artwork. He knew that this would take immense amount of not only creativity, but also willpower and just control over his quirk. You have to imagine that a suit of armor alone, in terms of details, is ridiculous. Think about power sources. Think about anything. Izuku had to imagine all of this at once, and you can tell that he's tired. But there's one thing that he did account for, and that's a quote-unquote autopilot mode. Izuku makes sure that this autopilot mode gives him a chance to relax and basically get some stamina back, so that when he controls the suit of armor once again, he can fully put on a show and fully show that he is here to stay and truly here to make a difference. The fight would then begin, and punching through the ice, Izuku would charge toward Todoroki. He can tell Todoroki is slowly but surely wearing down. Each iceberg is getting weaker and weaker as he breaks through them. He begins to shoot small condensed blasts toward Todoroki as he quickly closes the distance. Like I said, this armor may not be as protective. It is more used for agility and, well, more or less destruction, as you can see, or as you can hear. And Izuku is utilizing it to its best ability. As Todoroki's attacks get slower, Izuku seemingly gets faster, and he's able to close the distance and land a kick to the face of Todoroki, allowing him to stagger or force Todoroki to stagger back. But immediately after this, Izuku stands there, not moving an inch. He remembers something when he was in the back. Endeavor walked up to him, telling him to push Todoroki into using his other quirk. But why would he want that? He begins to think, maybe Todoroki has a grudge against his father, maybe there's something going on there. Yeah, he might not be a peacemaker, but he wants Todoroki at his best. It won't be the same if he's not. Bakugo would feel the same, and even if he was to lose here because of it, that means he just didn't deserve to face Bakugo in the finals, or face him down the line. Izuku would ask why he's not using his fire. He can tell he's slowing down. And immediately, Todoroki would say that he'll never use that quirk. It's not his. It's his, well, bastard of a father. And of course, he would say foul things about his father, and it'd be understandable. Izuku understands it. He gets it. Because, well, Endeavor obviously doesn't necessarily care about Todoroki. He only cares about making the perfect being to overtake All Might. It's pretty obvious. Izuku can see it. There's no way Todoroki is living this perfect, basically a luxurious life or luxury of a life, especially with someone like Endeavor. The rage Izuku sees in that man's eyes is something he's never seen before. He tells Todoroki, though, that this is a fight that he needs to know that his fire is his own, that there is no quirk that he has that is someone else's. His quirk is very unique. Half ice, half fire. Something interesting. Izuku slightly smirks beyond his mask that he currently has on, and he says that his quirk is almost as unique as his, as he kind of laughs. Izuku says that he's had a lot of drawbacks with his quirk, and he continues to have them, even now. His armor crumbles to dust, and Izuku shrugs. He says that the fight is already over, even if he decided not to use his flames. But if Todoroki decides that he wants to keep going, recover some of that stamina using his fire, he'd love to give it one more shot, one last hurrah. Izuku smiles as he opens his notebook and flips his pen, but as he says this, he says that he won't draw another thing and he won't move his pen unless Todoroki uses his fire. As he says this though, Todoroki's flames would erupt and Izuku's smile would overtake his face. A fight is what he wanted, and that's what he's getting. Maybe he didn't really need to fight Bakugo to really test his limits. This will test his limits. Izuku has seen how strong things get, certain things he's used, but he now knows that there's a lot of things in his journal he currently can't use. So he decides that he's going to give it one last go. Izuku begins to draw, but then he realizes something is on the other page. He flips it over and he swings his pen. What comes out is a giant being, a giant monster, somewhat mythological of some sorts. It's a monster that begins to hold the flames of Todoroki as they begin to slam into this monster. But this monster is no ordinary being. It's, like I said, it's very mythological, terrifying in fact. Izuku saw it and basically knew that this would drain his stamina entirely and probably collapse him to one knee. But he didn't care. When he threw this thing out, it was this giant ape-like monster, a monkey of some sorts, as if it was Sun Wukong, something from storybooks, from myth and mythological-esque stories, and it's this giant monkey creature that's holding back the flames. Izuku thought of this on a whim, and he begins to focus as hard as possible, pushing forward, and as he begins to think and focus, it seems as if his vision changes. His vision goes from this boy that's about maybe 5'8", seeing at a level not even close to as high as this giant ape, out of nowhere seeing everything from the view of Sun Wukong, this giant monster of a being. He somehow has synced with the monster, and he's now found a new level to his quirk, has found something that he didn't even realize he could do, a connection with his quirk. He looks back slightly as he's pushing past the flames, and his body is no longer there. It's as if he's synced with his imagination itself. Now this is something he didn't even realize would exist and be possible. But just as he realizes this, his body begins to crumble and he flies out, landing exactly where his body was beforehand, as if the spirit made his body disappear but reappear right where it was once before. Izuku would be knocked out unconscious as flames would slam into him, and luckily Cementos and many others were able to restrict the damage, but Izuku was already drained out of stamina and he overused his quirk far more than he possibly could. By the end of the fight, Todoroki took the win, and maybe Izuku gave him far more than he could possibly bargain with, opened his eyes to the fact that this was his quirk, and maybe even gave him a chance at truly becoming stronger than not only his father, but stronger than his father in a whole different way. That's what Todoroki wanted, and that's what he would get, especially at the very end when he would give Bakugo one hell of a run for his money and put him on the back foot. Todoroki would eventually win the sports festival, feeling that there was no reason for him not to use his flames against Bakugo, especially after what he saw from Izuku, the limits Izuku pushed to put himself in that position to somehow win, even though he knew that his stamina would fail him at the end of it. Todoroki felt that he deserved, or that he needed to show that he had learned from his mistakes in recognition of Izuku's sacrifice of more or less using the rest of his stamina instead of just forfeiting. Izuku has made an imprint on Todoroki, has definitely shown him something else. Eventually, Izuku would wake up at Recovery Girl's office, greeted by Momo and many others. They would ask if he's okay, and he says he's fine, just a little bit tired. He just needs a bite to eat, and he'll be fine. Of course, they all laugh it off because Izuku is so nonchalant. They ask how and what he even did. It was insane what he showed, the power, and he still lost. Somehow, is Todoroki that strong? And Izuku says yes, but also says that he unfortunately just needs a little bit more conditioning. Maybe he would have won the fight, drained Todoroki out, or forced him off the stage. But you'll never know now. We'll have to see in the future when they eventually have a rematch. Izuku is happy with the outcome, not really caring, especially with the development of his quirk he's seen so far. He's excited to look forward to see what's ahead. And what's ahead is the internships. The internships and offers that he will get very, very soon. But that is for part 4 of What If Deku Had an Artist Quirk. And if you want to see a specific internship that he should go to, let me know in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed, make sure to leave a like, make sure to leave a sub, make sure to leave a comment down below, all that good stuff. And I hope all y'all have an amazing day. Later.